Tattoos are meant to tell stories. For some, they're about family, love, or memories that never fade. But sometimes, tattoos tell darker stories, stories that were never meant to be revealed. What if a piece of body art could expose a killer? What if a man unknowingly wore his own confession for the world to see? This is the chilling story of Antony Garcia, a gang member whose ink wasn't just art, it was evidence. A tattoo that mapped out a murder scene so precisely, it cracked open a 4-year-old cold case. What began as just another senseless killing in East Los Angeles would turn into one of the most bizarre examples of forensic investigation in American crime history. Tonight, we uncover how Garcia's tattoo betrayed him, how detectives pieced it together, and how one man's skin told the story he tried to bury. To understand this story, we have to step back to East Los Angeles in the early 2000s, a place where gang culture ran deep, where every street corner seemed marked with graffiti tags, and every neighborhood was claimed by one crew or another. For many, daily life meant walking a fine line between survival and danger. In December 2004, that danger came to a head in a quiet liquor store on the outskirts of Pico Rivera. It was the holiday season. Christmas lights lined the streets. Families were shopping for gifts, and children were waiting for Santa. But inside that liquor store, one man's life was about to end. John Juarez, 23 years old, walked into the store that night, not knowing it would be his last. Within minutes, an armed gunman stormed in and opened fire. Bullets tore through the store. Chaos erupted. When the shooting stopped, Juarez was dead. Another life claimed by senseless gang violence. Detectives from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department arrived at the scene quickly. They marked shell casings, dusted for fingerprints, and interviewed every witness they could find. But in communities scarred by decades of gang wars, silence was the norm. No one wanted to speak. No one wanted to risk retaliation. And those who did talk provided little more than fragments. Rumors, whispers, shadows of truth. There was no surveillance footage, no clear eyewitness testimony, no murder weapon recovered. The trail went cold almost immediately. For the Juarez family, that silence was unbearable. They buried John just days before Christmas, their grief compounded by the realization that his killer might never face justice. Weeks turned into months, and months into years. The liquor store shooting of John Juarez became another statistic in Los Angeles County's mounting backlog of unsolved gang murders. Cold cases carry a certain weight. They linger in file cabinets, gathering dust, while families pray for closure that may never come. For 4 years, Juarez's case sat dormant, unsolved, his killer walking free. Detectives had little reason to believe the truth would ever surface. But in 2008, an unexpected arrest changed everything. A young man named Antony Garcia, just another face in the cycle of gang life, was pulled over in a routine traffic stop. What officers didn't know was that they had just stumbled onto the biggest break the Juarez case would ever see. Not because of what Garcia had in his car, not because of what he said, but because of what he carried with him permanently on his skin. When detectives saw Garcia's chest tattoo, they didn't just see ink. They saw a confession, etched in chilling detail. A Christmas-lit liquor store, a shooting victim, a bent street lamp outside, the murder scene itself. But how could a tattoo become evidence? And why would anyone ink their crime onto their skin? The answer would unravel one of the most bizarre cases. By the time Antony Garcia was stopped in 2008, John Juarez had been gone for nearly 4 years. His murder wasn't just another crime statistic. It was a brutal reminder of the grip gang violence held over East Los Angeles. And for detectives, it was another case that had slipped through their fingers. But before Garcia's tattoo would change everything, we need to go back to the night of the murder itself. The night Juarez's life was stolen. December 2004. Pico Rivera, a community on the edge of Los Angeles County, home to working-class families, mom-and-pop shops, and a nightlife scene where trouble was never too far away. It was just days before Christmas when John Juarez, 23 years old, walked into Ed's liquor store, a neighborhood staple. Juarez wasn't armed. He wasn't looking for trouble. He was simply going about his evening. But at the same time, a rival gang member had marked Juarez. He was followed inside. Moments late, gumfida rupta. The shooter raised his weapon and fired with no hesitation. Bullets shattered glass, bottles tumbled from shelves, and customers dropped to the floor in panic. By the time the chaos settled, Juarez lay bleeding on the ground. The shooter fled into the night. The streets of Pico Rivera were quiet again, but one family's life had been ripped apart forever. Sheriff's deputies arrived within minutes, but the killer was gone. The liquor store became a crime scene. Yellow tape across the entrance, flashing red and blue lights reflecting in Christmas decorations that now felt bitterly out of place. Detectives combed through the store. They picked up bullet casings, photographed shattered shelves, and dusted the counter for prints. They questioned witnesses who were still trembling in shock. But as is often the case in gang-related shootings, cooperation was minimal. Some witnesses refused to speak at all. Others gave vague accounts that contradicted each other. Fear of retaliation ran deep. In neighborhoods like Pico Rivera, silence was a survival tactic. Detectives suspected gang involvement from the start. Juarez had been linked, at least loosely, to gang activity. The liquor store itself sat in contested territory, claimed by one gang, but often prowled by rivals. The shooting had all the markings of a targeted hit. But suspicion wasn't enough. Detectives needed hard evidence, and that they didn't have. For weeks, detectives tried to push forward. They canvassed neighborhoods. They followed up on leads. But every door seemed to close in their faces. The Juarez family begged for answers. John's mother wept openly at press conferences. His friends described him as someone who deserved better than a violent end in a liquor store. Yet the street stayed quiet. This silence wasn't unusual. In Los Angeles, especially in areas with heavy gang presence, unsolved murders piled up. For every homicide that made the evening news, there were countless others that never saw closure. Detectives knew that without a lucky break, Juarez's case was doomed to the same fate. And that's exactly what happened. After exhausting every available lead, the file was closed. The case was labeled cold. To understand how the case would eventually be solved, we have to step into Antony Garcia's world. Garcia was a member of the Rivera 13 gang, a local street crew that had carved out territory in East Los Angeles. Like many young men in his neighborhood, Garcia grew up in a culture where loyalty to the gang was everything. Respect was earned through violence, and status often came at the cost of someone else's life. In the gang lifestyle, tattoos weren't just decoration. They were badges of honor. Each one told a story, a battle fought, a fallen brother, a prison stint, a murder. The body became a living canvas of crime, violence, and allegiance. Garcia embraced that culture fully. He covered his chest, arms, and body with ink. And one day, he decided to commemorate something far darker, a murder he believed he had gotten away with. Back at the sheriff's department, Juarez's murder sat in a filing cabinet. Detectives moved on to other cases, new homicides, fresh blood spilled on Los Angeles streets. Cold cases are brutal for investigators. They represent failure, but also unfinished business. They wait for new evidence, a new witness, or sometimes just pure luck. And in this case, luck came in the most unexpected form. Antony Garcia, pulled over for something as minor as a traffic violation, had no idea that his past was literally written across his chest. No one knew it yet. Not the officers who booked him, not even Garcia himself. But that tattoo would become the single most important piece of evidence in solving John Juarez's murder. 4 years after the murder, Juarez's killer thought he was free. He believed he'd escaped justice, that the crime would remain buried. But Antony Garcia had made a mistake no criminal should ever make. He confessed, not in words, not in court, but in ink. His own tattoo was about to betray him. It was 2008. For years after John Juarez was gunned down inside a Pico Rivera liquor store, detectives had long since placed his murder into the cold case files. His family had stopped expecting updates. Justice seemed out of reach. But one routine booking, one photograph, was about to breathe life back into the investigation. When Antony Garcia was arrested on suspicion of driving without a license, officers booked him like any other suspect. They fingerprinted him, photographed him, and logged his identifying features, including his tattoos. For Garcia, this was nothing unusual. He'd been arrested before. He wore his tattoos like armor, proof of his loyalty to Rivera, 13. To him, they were status symbols. To law enforcement, they were identifiers. But one tattoo stood out. Sprawled across Garcia's chest was a detailed image. Not random ink, not abstract art, but a scene, an actual depiction of a liquor store, complete with Christmas lights strung across its roofline. And just outside that store, a figure falling to the ground, being shot by another figure holding a pistol. It wasn't just a tattoo. It was a crime scene. At first, the tattoo didn't draw much attention. Many gang members inked their bodies with violent imagery. Guns, skulls, street corners. It's almost a visual language in itself. But when homicide detectives reviewed Garcia's booking photos, one detail caught their eye: the liquor store. They knew that store. They had worked that case. Detective Kevin Lloyd, a seasoned investigator, stopped cold when he saw the tattoo. He had been there in 2004, combing through the liquor store after Juarez was gunned down. The image etched into Garcia's skin was eerily familiar. It wasn't just a liquor store. It was the liquor store. The Christmas lights, the outline of the storefront. It was all there. And in the tattoo's chilling detail, the shooter fired at a man collapsing in front of the store. Lloyd realized he wasn't just looking at body art. He was staring at a confession inked in permanent ink. The discovery was stunning, but detectives knew they couldn't rush. A tattoo, no matter how detailed, wouldn't be enough for a conviction. They needed to prove two things: that the tattoo accurately depicted Juarez's murder, and that Garcia himself had been the shooter. First, they compared the tattoo to crime scene photos. The similarities were undeniable. The liquor store's shape, its roofline, even the Christmas lights hanging that night. It was all captured in ink. Next, detectives noticed small details in the tattoo. A helicopter hovering above the scene, a street lamp, and the lettering Rivera Kills scrawled in gang-style script. This wasn't just artistic expression. This was storytelling. And the story matched the unsolved murder of John Juarez almost perfectly. But here's the problem. Tattoos are protected under free speech. Courts are careful about how body art is used as evidence because in most cases, tattoos represent affiliation or expression, not confessions. Detectives couldn't walk into court and simply say, "Look, he has a tattoo of the crime. Case closed." That wouldn't hold up. Instead, they needed Garcia to connect the dots himself. They needed him to admit, willingly, that the tattoo wasn't random, that it was personal, that it was his crime. So detectives devised a plan. They wouldn't confront Garcia directly. Instead, they placed him in a cell with an undercover officer, posing as another inmate. The setup was simple but dangerous. The undercover officer would strike up conversation, casually compliment the tattoo, and let Garcia do the talking. If Garcia bragged, if he admitted the meaning behind the ink, detectives would finally have their break. And it worked. When the undercover officer asked about the tattoo, Garcia opened up. He admitted it was real. He admitted it was him, the shooter. He even described details of the crime, like how Juarez had tried to run but collapsed outside the liquor store. The tattoo wasn't just art. It was a diary carved in ink. And now, Garcia's own words confirmed what detectives already suspected. With Garcia's confession secured, detectives had what they needed. The tattoo told the story. The undercover recording confirmed it. And the cold case file, once collecting dust, was now alive again. In 2011, Antony Garcia stood trial for the murder of John Juarez. Prosecutors leaned heavily on the tattoo evidence, showing jurors the chilling parallels between the ink and the crime. They replayed Garcia's recorded admissions. Jurors were stunned. One later admitted the tattoo was unlike anything they'd ever seen. It was as if the killer had written his crime across his own body, daring the world to notice. After deliberation, the verdict was clear: guilty. Antony Garcia was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 65 years to life in prison. A tattoo meant to boast about a killing became the very evidence that sealed Antony Garcia's fate. But the case raised bigger questions about gang culture, about the arrogance of killers, and about the unexpected ways justice can finally catch up. Because in the end, Garcia's biggest mistake wasn't pulling the trigger. It was putting the truth in ink. The verdict was read. Antony Garcia, convicted of murder, sentenced to 65 years to life. The courtroom fell into a heavy silence. For the family of John Juarez, it was the moment they had waited for, the justice they thought would never come. But while one chapter closed, another began. Because this case wasn't just about one gang member, one victim, or one tattoo. It was about something much larger. For 4 years, John Juarez's family had lived with unanswered questions. Why him? Why there? And why had his killer never been caught? When detectives showed them the tattoo, the family was horrified. To know that Garcia had not only murdered John, but had bragged about it, etched it into his skin like a trophy, was almost unbearable. But when the jury delivered its verdict, the family finally had a measure of closure. Justice had been delayed, but not denied. John's mother later spoke of the relief she felt. Relief that her son hadn't been forgotten. Relief that Garcia's arrogance had led to his undoing. The tattoo that once mocked her son's death had now become the very proof that ensured her son's killer would never walk free again. The Garcia case also shined a harsh light on gang culture in Los Angeles. For many in Rivera, 13, and other gangs, tattoos are more than body art. They're symbols of rank, of territory, of loyalty. Each inked line tells a story of battles fought, of streets claimed, of lives taken. But Garcia's tattoo wasn't just symbolic. It was specific. Too specific. Law enforcement experts noted that in most cases, gang tattoos avoid precise details that could tie someone to a particular crime. Garcia broke that rule. Whether out of pride, recklessness, or sheer arrogance, he essentially documented his crime scene in permanent ink. And in doing so, he turned his own chest into a confession wall. For investigators, the case became a textbook example of how overlooked details can crack a case wide open. Detective Kevin Lloyd later admitted that when he first saw Garcia's tattoo, he had to look twice. Many officers might have dismissed it as typical gang ink, but Lloyd trusted his memory and his instincts. The lesson was clear. Evidence doesn't always come in the form of fingerprints or DNA. Sometimes it's hidden in plain sight. After Garcia's conviction, law enforcement agencies across the country began to pay closer attention to tattoos during booking. Not as automatic confessions, but as potential clues that might lead to connections between suspects and unsolved crimes. But the Garcia case also sparked controversy. Legal experts warned about the dangers of over-relying on tattoos as evidence. After all, tattoos are a form of free expression. What if someone simply liked a violent image or copied a scene from a movie? The courts had to be careful. In Garcia's case, it wasn't just the tattoo. It was his own words, caught on recording, that sealed the deal. Without that confession, the tattoo might never have been admissible. Still, the case left a lingering question. Where is the line between free speech and a confession carved in skin? Perhaps the most haunting part of the Garcia case is the arrogance behind it. Why would someone immortalize a murder on their chest? Why take the risk? Criminologists argue it comes down to pride and ego. In gang culture, reputation is currency. To Garcia, killing John Juarez wasn't just an act of violence. It was a badge of honor. And what better way to display that honor than on his own body, for everyone to see? But that arrogance became his downfall. What he thought made him powerful only made him vulnerable. And in the end, his own pride pulled him into the very prison he thought he was too untouchable to enter. While Garcia's name became infamous in crime documentaries, John Juarez's story deserves equal space. He was a young man, only 23 years old, with his life ahead of him. He wasn't a gang leader or rival boss. He was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, caught in the crossfire of a gang member desperate to prove himself. For his family, Juarez will never just be the victim of a notorious tattoo case. He was a son, a brother, a loved one, stolen from them far too soon. And while Garcia spends the rest of his life behind bars, Juarez's family continues to carry his memory forward. The Antony Garcia case is one of the strangest in true crime history. A murder solved not by DNA, not by eyewitnesses, but by ink. A tattoo meant to boast about violence ended up screaming the truth. A killer who thought he was untouchable was undone by his own pride. And a family who thought justice had been buried finally saw it rise again. Sometimes the smallest details, the ones hiding in plain sight, can break open the darkest mysteries. Because in the end, ink fades, but justice does not. If this story shocked you as much as it did us, hit that like button so more people can hear it. Subscribe for more true crime documentaries, where we dive into the cases that prove truth really is stranger than fiction. And let us know in the comments, what do you think about using tattoos as evidence? Was it justice, or was it dangerous precedent? Like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this.